1, 2.
3, 4.
Hello, could everybody take their seats if possible? We are getting some more seats for people. So awesome to see so many people here today. We've actually had to get a bigger room because there's so many audio people, which is awesome. So welcome to the best day of Develop, the audio track. Yay! So welcome, and thank you very much for being here today. What I will say is we've got a fantastic day ahead of you with some awesome talks curated by the marvelous John Broomhall.
Hands, of course. Yeah, let's do that. Oh, it's my turn.
Yeah.
Hi. It's my turn. This is new for us. We usually don't do a dual presentation. So
tag teaming.
I need to, let's introduce ourselves then, right? Because this is the lovely Adele Cutting. And my name is Matthew Florians. So, and we are going to be your hosts today on this audio track. And that means we need to do as little talking as possible, get out of the way for the good talks.
Exactly. So before we go on, it's probably only right that we address the state of the industry at the moment. It's been a pretty horrible year in games, and I don't think anybody has not felt, both companies and individuals have not felt the effects of studio closures, redundancies, or canned projects, both if you're either in-house or if you're an outsourcer. So we want this day to be one that feeds your soul, because our love for audio is still strong. So we're going to come together, learn lots of new information, and we have the support of the game audio community. So without further ado, we'd like to have some interactivity and a show of hands. So who here is an outsourcer or a freelancer? Could you put your hand up? Wow, that's awesome. That's nearly half.
Yeah, have a look around, because those are people you want to be working with. For the people that didn't put a hand up. Yes, and let's ask, who here works in-house at a studio? That's another good representation, isn't it?
Awesome.
Yeah. How about students? Do we have any students here? That is the future.
It's all down to you.
Yes, you too. So we're also, are there sound designers? Who here is a sound designer? That's always a good one, right? We get most of the hands. Composers, musicians? Yeah. Dialogue people? Excellent.
Only what? Oh, two. Two. I'll put my hand up. I'll join in. Oh, awesome. Yes. 4. Great stuff. So what we want you to do today...
We can't forget about tech.
Oh, sorry. Programmers or technicals.
Excellent.
Designers. Yeah, they are sort of important. So this is your clan, this is your people, and we do ask you in the, especially in the world that we're in at the moment, to sort of like look around and introduce yourself and mix and make new friends.
Yes, so I'm not on Facebook, by the way, or TikTok, or whatever is very modern. I've got my text here to save paper. Yeah, today, as you said, it's a day of learning. It's a day for all of us to come together. And if you've been here before, you usually come away from this day feeling revitalized and feeling part of a community. We are a clan of people that all appreciate good audio. And what's really special about this group of people, I think more so than maybe any other discipline, is that we love good sounding games, and we love it so much that we share. We share things that other people wouldn't share. They think it's a secret. They think it is what makes it great. But I think what makes game audio great is the fact that we share, that we are so open about our approaches, the way we organize our teams, how our technology works. I think that's incredible. I think that is really what gives this whole day and this whole community such a boost. I always come back super energized from this, and it's absolutely amazing. So to see so many of you in this room, yeah, it's absolutely amazing. So let's get out of the way and then very quickly do the housekeeping things.
Yeah, a
that
bit of
need to do.
housekeeping.
Thank you for that phone sound, because that was exactly what we needed right now. That was good timing.
Actually, there are more chairs. If people want to get chairs, there are loads more chairs in that room, so we can get those out, so you're not having to stand up. So housekeeping, if you could all switch your phones either off or to silent, that would be amazing. Please can you arrive on time for the session so that the speakers aren't disrupted. Also, it's being videoed and recorded to be viewed at a later date, so please thank Andy and Dan. If there is a fire alarm that goes off, it will be a fire alarm. We're not expecting a test. So please exit through that door as soon as possible, or there's another one there. So another thing today, we've got a few session changes. Unfortunately, John Vincent is poorly, and so is Mattia Cellotto. He really sends his apologies. He's super gutted because he's actually in Brighton, but he just doesn't want to spread whatever he's got. So please, let's all send them our best wishes. But we do have two absolute superheroes who've come to the rescue. We've got Barney Pratt, who's going to be joining us at the panel at the end of the day from Supermassive Games. And we've got Josh Whedon from Pit Stop Productions, who's going to be talking about probably my favorite thing, dialogue and storytelling as Matt's replacement. So massive thank you for them for really coming in last minute. This all happened last night, so it's quite stressful. And massive thanks to Susan Marshall, who's from Tandem Events, who actually had a backup, which was brilliant. So we do have something new, apart from Matthew, today, which is when it comes to the panel discussion at the end, if you have any questions, or if you think of any questions during the day that you want to give to Lydia, Grace, Rob, Bjorn, Barney, is that everybody? I think so.
I think so. John, Ron, Lydia, Grace, Richard, John. Yes.
Yes.
We prepared this very well.
If you do have any questions for them, please go and see one of the conference volunteers, and they'll write it down and they'll give it to us so that when it comes to the panel, we'll be able to ask them so that you don't have to remember it all day. Matthew.
Yes. Back to my my list. So, did we thank John Broomhall? Because it is in my list and I might have missed it.
We did say right at the start, but we can do it again because without him, this day would not be happening.
Absolutely. So yes, no, we said that. That's very, very good. Does everybody have a seat? That is really good. I can't. Why did I write this down? This is so cheesy. Anyways, let me just set up a multi-point emitter, get an event going, attach a play event, and point it at a sound. Welcome to develop audio track
2024.
2024. And this is why you need tech. Right. Hello, everybody. So we're going right for our first talk, and I think that's on good time. You guys actually have 5 minutes extra if I hurry up. So in 2019, Massive's audio team pushed environmental acoustics to a new level in the Division 2. They created thousands of impulse responses to basically cover every detail in the map. Bit of history, if you had a Sound Blaster card in the end of the 90s or early 2000s, you had something called EAX, Environmental Audio Extensions, and it was hardware that was giving us reverbs and early reflection. It was quite amazing. Then Vista came along and Vista killed that. And it was the last time audio had hardware acceleration for those types of features. What's really cool about the next talk is that there's this other thing, this other group of people, graphics people, that get like more than one raycast a frame. They get like 8 million of them. So what if we could do something with that? And I think that's what this talk is about. I'm very, very excited about this because it's a talk about technology and audio, and that's where our job really shines. So a big hand for Kasparas and Simon, who seem to arrive from the future of game audio and the mystical land of Sweden. And they created some incredible tech for Ubisoft's brilliant sounding game, Avatar, in the talk, Frontiers of Sound Propagation. Big hand for them, please.
it in. Okay. Hi. We brought a presentation. I don't know if maybe we can get it up here. That'll be nice. And then we get going. We hear the sounds already. That's nice.
Entering Pandora.
It's happening. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about the sound propagation system we worked on for Avatar. And it's exciting. Maybe. Let's see. This is our faces. My name is Simon. I'm a sound designer. And I've been working on Avatar for like 4 years now.
And my name is Kasparas. I also work at Massive as an audio programmer on the engine team, so supporting both Avatar, but also other projects we have. And yeah, made sure to wear the same shirt, so you really know it's me.
Yeah, I didn't get the memo this time. You just have to trust me, I think.
Let's take a look at our agenda for today, what we're going to talk about. So we'll start by going through our goal, what we wanted to achieve with this sound propagation system, our journey, basically what kind of challenges we faced along the way and the solutions we came up with for those challenges. A bit about also the now, what we have in the game today, and a bit about the performance and how we're handling that. And finally, a bit about the future and where we'd like to take this next and for our upcoming projects. And hopefully, a little Q&A at the end.
Absolutely. But before we start, I want to first do a quick crash course on sound propagation, just so we're all on the same page. And it is a very complex topic about how sound travels through space. And there's 3 terms we'll use a lot today, which is attenuation and obstruction and occlusion. So I'll just run through it like super fast. So first, attenuation. It's about how sounds change over distance. So if we have this Ubisoft-approved smiley face, this is the listener, and we're standing next to a waterfall, and the sound changes as we walk away. Which usually in games means, we change the volume, we filter the sound. Sometimes we swap out some assets over distance if we feel a bit fancy. And then obstruction happens when there's something in the way, like this tree, for instance. And then the direct path is partially blocked, but sound can still sort of bend around by doing something called diffraction. And that could sound something like this. So it sort of applies light volume modulation and some filtering as well. But then what happens if there's not just one tree, but there's like many? It's a full forest in the way. Then now the direct path is fully blocked, but then sound can still reach the listener by bouncing around and reflecting off of surfaces. And it could sound something like this. A little bit more strong effect, a little bit more diffuse sounding. And then finally, occlusion is when the direct and the indirect paths are fully blocked and the sound has to travel through something. For instance, a room or a wall or a door or something like that. So now there's no direct path anymore, but we still hear something from the outside. So occlusion can apply quite heavy volume changes and filtering to the sounds. And that's the crash course.
So now that we're all on the same page about sound propagation, let's talk about our goal and what we wanted to achieve with this new system. But to talk about the goal, we should also talk about what does the game need. Still, in the end, we're still trying to make this very specific game, Avatar. We also wondering, maybe some of you have played the game Avatar. See some hands, a few hands. That's great, perfect. Thank you. Yes, Dave played it. That's good. We prepared a little video, short snippet from one of our trailers, just to get a general feeling of what the game is for those who haven't perhaps seen it before.
Pretty good effect. Yeah, so Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, we have a strong focus on making like an immersive and reactive world. And sound propagation is quite important for immersion to get that sense of really being on the ground. And the world is the star, and it's both huge and complex. And we want to sort of distinguish between, is it just one tree in the way, or is it a full forest in the way between me and the sound? And since it's so huge, we also want to limit the amount of manual work we'll have to do. So like, if we can get rid of like placing volumes around for each room and each window, each door, that would be quite nice. And we also have a lot of organic structures in the game, which we need to support. So like caves and canyons and tree trunks. There's like not quite indoor spaces, not quite outdoor spaces. So it's a bit complicated for sound propagation. So just to summarize, the goal is that we want to make something that works on Pandora, and we need to reduce manual work as much as possible. And then we want it to be responsive and like react to real-time changes in the environment.
A new goal. It is wondrous to fly on thought alone, to touch the mind of another. You must secure the plan.
How do I?
I don't know if you saw that over there. I'm really sorry. But we can push off a cliff. Yeah. Okay, cool. So we started on the journey, which is part 2 of this talk. And we've divided into 4 parts today. First, we'll talk about the prototype we made, and then some challenges we found with that prototype. And then we'll investigate how to solve those challenges. And then we'll show you how we solved them in the end as well.
Indeed. So let's start by going and talking about the prototype. Around the time when we were working on Avatar, we were also implementing ray tracing in Snowdrop, since there were these new graphics cards coming out and new consoles with hardware ray tracing support. There's also some talks on the GDC Vault if you want to learn more about like the very low level ray tracing implementation itself. So we tried to build a prototype to use GPU ray tracing for sound propagation, and also focusing only on the obstruction and occlusion values for the first version, just to keep the scope a bit more narrow and just to see if we can get something working. So how do we use ray tracing on the GPU? Well, together with some wonderful rendering programmers, we developed an API which allows us to set up queries, which then return our results some frames later. So we can support currently 2 different types of rays. These are single rays, which are just essentially a simple direct raycast on the GPU, or a cluster ray, which is sort of like a cone of rays that is a bit more optimized way to trace many rays at once. This then returns the hit position, the surface normal or orientation, and the material of the surface. So this we support on all the target platforms that we have. We have also software fallback for ray tracing if your GPU does not support it on hardware. And then we also use what's called a compute pipeline. So we use compute shaders to run this task, and that happens also asynchronously or in parallel with other tasks like depth rendering, for example, on the GPU. So I'll get back to that a little bit later and why that's important. So let's now go through and see how we use this API and how we use rays to simulate propagation. So starting off about obstruction, it's when the direct path is blocked, as we talked about before. So if in this example, let's say this is a top-down view of some simple map, we have a sound source placed here, and then let's say we have a sound listener just around the corner. If we want to find out if the direct path is blocked, we trace a cone of rays, and then this might be like around 32 rays placed in sort of like a cone pattern. And we check just how many of those are blocked to get our initial value for obstruction. So then what about diffraction when it's becoming a bit blocked and then we want the sound to bend and around the corners? Well, here first we trace a 3D grid around the listener. So here you can see a 2D slice of how that could look like. Again, maybe not you on the side, but there is a grid. And then, once we have this grid, we also know the visibility from each cell to the listener. Having that, we take every sound source position in the map that is currently playing, and we find the cells that are both visible to the listener and in the way between the listener and the source. Then we trace rays back to each of those points, and this way we can also figure out estimated sort of diffraction value or how easy the sound can bend around these obstacles. But it only is able to do one angle of diffraction here. And so once we have both of these, then we also started thinking, well, what about if the sound is already obstructed? How complex is the indirect path? So let's say you're in the forest, there's some trees in the way, but then you also walk inside of a tree trunk, and this you want the sound to change a bit more. So we implemented an approach that tries to simulate how many reflections can reach the listener. We do that by first tracing out a bunch of rays in a sphere from the sound listener position in every direction, again in 3D. Then we collect these points and we trace some bounce rays from those points. We find even more reflection points. So now here we have the blue points representing all the reflection points we found around the listener. And then we again find every sound source that's playing and trace back to these points to get the estimated value of how easy the sound can reflect and reach the listener in the indirect signal. Then we use this value to apply a little bit of occlusion to have this extra effect. And you might notice this is not the same as how we described occlusion in the beginning of the talk, but again, we'll get back to that a little bit later. Ooh. So now here we have a short video just to show this first version prototype in action. This is from our pre-alpha version of the game. Here you can see there is a sound source behind this log, which is some water sound represented by this red sphere. And there's also the debug on for the diffraction and reflection rays. And you can listen to how the sound changes as you walk through the log, and the sound gets partially occluded. So, having this all in mind, let's take a look at summarize it a bit and some takeaways from this prototype. It sounded quite promising. We liked the values we were seeing, and in the examples we've been testing, it sounded good. The performance was good, it was scalable. The load is distributed over several frames, and large part of this cost is also per listener. So we trace out the reflection points once, and we can trace out the diffraction grid once and reuse this data for all the sound points in the level that are playing. The system sort of works out of the box, so we can use existing ray trace geometry and ray tracing materials that are set up by the graphics designers, and maybe we don't even need portals, we were thinking. And the system was quite responsive, so there was a little bit of delay from the ray tracing results, and sometimes we will need several steps to complete the full calculation. But by using some value prediction, by keeping a cache essentially, like some cached depth maps and cached values based on the positions of some different sources that we're playing before, we can predict a value for a new sound that starts playing. And we also use interpolation on these values, and also in some cases some low-pass filtering on these values that we get out of the system. We were able to achieve like smooth and responsive results.
Yes, that sounds nice. Sounds good. But we still had a few challenges we found when we tested this in the game, and we want to just show you two of them today. One we call indoor spaces, where the occlusion values would sometimes max out a bit too fast. And then the other one we've called unnatural occlusion, where sometimes the occlusion would affect some sounds a bit too much. We'll talk about those.
Yeah, so let's start by looking at the indoor space issue. We started out, once we found this issue in the game, we started by building a test level, or what we call a gym in this case, and to really isolate the issue a bit better. So here you have a video from this gym, and you can see there's an NPC in the room. The green sphere here represents the weapon emitter that is playing some gunfire. And you can listen to how this sound changes as we're walking away and outside of the room.
Come at me, Blue!
So as you might have noticed, the sound really gets occluded quite quickly. And to understand this issue better, we need to remember that we used occlusion based on the results of this reflection ray tracing to add that extra effect on the sound. And the way it works is, again, like a sphere of rays, a few bounces, and then we try to trace back to those points. So what would happen in these scenarios indoors with small portals is that just these bounces, these rays would not, even if we trace quite a lot and we try to do quite a few bounces, it wouldn't always be able to find these small openings, because it still relies on essentially random chance to hit them, and we would need a very extreme amount of rays to really guarantee that it will always make it. It was struggling at finding these small portals, and the sounds would get too occluded.
Yes, and then this other one we've called unnatural occlusion. And I want to just play this video first so you get an idea about what I mean by unnatural. And again, we can listen to the gunshot sounds of this enemy as we walk away and enter a tree trunk.
They're going down!
So in this case, these gunshot sounds almost disappear entirely when we enter this tree trunk, and it doesn't really sound that nice. And we were wondering sort of why did it work nicely on the water sounds in the other video we saw when we walk into the tree trunk, but not on these gunshot sounds. And to sort of understand that issue, we need to remember that we sort of applied occlusion when the path the sound was traveling was very complex. So as we reach the tree trunk here in this video, it's already obstructed, and then we walk into the tree trunk. We want to apply a bit of occlusion to give like extra feeling of like you're in sort of a semi-closed space in a way. But then like applying occlusion, what does it really mean? We'll look a little bit in Y's on this beautiful occlusion volume curve. And then the effect of the occlusion is defined here. So let's say that when we're in the tree trunk, it hits like this point on the curve. And we just had one global occlusion curve for everything, which means that all sounds are treated in the same way. So we sort of tweaked this curve to sound nice on the water sounds, but that didn't mean it would sound good on the gunshots. And then, so that's an issue. And then also, we used this curve for the more traditional sort of occlusion, where we are behind a closed window, and maybe there's a closed door. We need to like get the effect of that fitting in this curve also. So we're sort of relying on this curve to fix a lot of different things for us, which is not so nice.
So that brings us to the investigation and what we tried to do about it. So the first thing we did was actually just take a little bit of a step back and try to see what other ways we can simulate sound propagation with. And so we tried to implement a voxelized solution for sound propagation and use pathfinding instead. This would address the issues we were seeing, because we would be able to separately find the path distance first and then also identify any occluders along the way. So we would get the distance and we would get an occlusion value. And it would be able to find rooms with small openings, as long as the resolution of the voxels is good enough, and it should also still work well outdoors. So we made a prototype to test this approach, and while it had promising results and it sounded good, the complex and detailed geometry and also lots of verticality in the game, so presented us with a bit of a challenge in terms of memory usage. So the voxel representation of the map was getting quite large, and also the pathfinding costs that we were doing, even with some clever optimizations, it was still not very predictable always, because it really depends on the kind of environment you're in, where the sound sources are located. And so in the end, we concluded that while this worked well in smaller environments, it was hard to scale to reach those far away, long distance sound that we needed to support if there's something hundreds of meters away inside a building, that kind of situation.
What's going on? What happened?
Been talking voxels for a while.
A long, long while.
Must you prodded them like this? If they can walk, they can walk.
We have a game to ship.
Yeah, we had a game to ship and we had to sort of get done. So we took a step back and sort of thought about what is it that we really need to do to make this work. And we realized that the game is mostly outdoors, and the prototype we had worked pretty well outdoors already, and the interior spaces we had they were not very complex. So sort of manually tagging those with some volumes to help this system wouldn't be huge. What do you say? It wouldn't be too much work, especially because it already existed, because other teams in the game were relying on these boxes as well. So we could just hook into that. And then the interiors we have are mostly static. So the walls don't just like crumble. And that means we don't really need a sort of fully dynamic runtime solution, which brings us to the solutions to the issues we talked about.
Exactly. So getting back to the indoor spaces issue, where we noticed that the system was struggling to find these small portals. After our investigation, we concluded that a hybrid approach was working best for us in this scenario. So we took a bit of inspiration from the learnings we had from working with the voxelized solution and the ray-traced one, and we decided on implementing some pathfinding through the rooms and the connected portals first to get the initial path for the sound. And then on each portal, we would essentially use ray marching through the portal volume. So we would kind of like pierce it with a bunch of needles and in a way kind of like voxelize that box of the portal to find out both how open it is and what kind of material is in the different parts of the portal. So we just limit the amount of space we do this process on very substantially that way. And we kept using the ray trace solution we had before for outdoors and any time where there is portal-to-portal propagation, so in between rooms and so on. So if you are inside or the sound is outside, first we do this ray tracing step to the portal, then we check the occlusion on the portal, and then we do the ray tracing step from the portal to the listener position. So here's a video of how the same example and the same test level sounds now. And you can listen to how this gunshot sound is already audible when we're outside the room. And the debug rendering here is showing the path the sound is taking and how it is being repositioned.
I'll make you bleed, Blue!
Nice, nice. And then this other issue where we were relying on this one curve to fix many different things, we ended up solving it by sort of splitting up occlusion and attenuation. And what we mean by that is we just let occlusion be occlusion, sort of as we sort of described it in the beginning of the talk. So whenever the sound has to travel through something, we apply occlusion. And then this data we had for like a sound traveling a very complex path, we used that instead to add extra distance to the emitters. So we could sort of not rely on the sort of global occlusion curve for that effect, but just push these emitters a little bit away, and then it would utilize the attenuation share sets that each sound already had set up in Ys. So that would sort of, you know, a gunshot sound would be affected way less than a small something else that you don't hear far away, water sound. That was the example. And then this example sounds like this now. Quite aggressive. And that brings us sort of to the now part, where we'll just talk a bit about the system we have in the game today.
Exactly. So we get this quite common question about how do we actually get to do these raycasts on the GPU? How are we allowed the use of the GPU? So we wanted to talk a little bit about performance and how that all works right now in the game. So here's some stats we collected from a relatively low spec PC for our game, which is something with like a GTX 1070 kind of graphics card. In terms of memory, we use around 16 megabytes for the diffraction grid data, and then maybe around 2 megabytes for the path traversal data. On the CPU, we spend around 0.2 milliseconds on just scheduling, setting up the race, and then processing the results when we collect them back. And then there is still around 1 millisecond of time spent on pathfinding as you move through rooms and portals. And then for the GPU, we have around 0 to 200 microseconds of time. And this is time that is the total impact we have by running this task on the full frame time that is taken to render a single frame. So what this means is it can be around 200 on a graphics card like the GTX 1070, as I mentioned before, where you don't have any hardware support for ray tracing. And then it gets basically to 0 if we're looking at the new generation, like the current generation of consoles or RTX graphics cards. So you might be thinking, how can it be 0? That's interesting.
That's so low.
That is very low. Not negative, but so what this means is we're using asynchronous compute, as I mentioned before. So the GPU is actually also rendering the depth buffer at the same time as we're doing these raycasts. Basically, these workloads are a little bit different, and the GPU consists of a lot of different hardware components inside it. So it's able to essentially run these two workloads in parallel, and before it was just underutilized during that time when there's the depth buffer being rendered, and we're basically just taking some of those ray tracing resources that are not used at that time to do our audio ray tracing. So there is in the end no impact on the actual render times. But there's still, of course, not infinite time we can take there. So how do we fit it all, and how do we fit all this work into the time we have? Let's take a look at how we optimize the GPU workload. But to understand the optimizations, I just want to briefly talk about some important differences between a CPU and the GPU, and it's on a very high level. I like to look at it a bit like a CPU as an individual, just doing some work, and the GPU is a bit more like a factory that does a lot of things at the same time. And so just in this example, let's say we have these two different types of workloads, single rays and ray clusters. And here we have a little timeline. And let's say we want to do this work on the CPU. So here we have an example CPU thread. You might be running some rays. They might take different amounts of time to complete the process. And then maybe there's a ray cluster that you want to trace. Then another array, another cluster, another array. Not an issue. You can just kind of switch between these workloads and complete them in sequence. If you want, you can scale it across multiple threads, but that, of course, takes away time from other game systems. And so let's look at how this looks like on the GPU. GPU works usually in thread groups, or it can be also called wavefronts. And you might, so this is just an example 3. It's usually more like 32 or something like that. But you can see already that all these blocks are the same length. And why that is the GPU works a bit like a factory again. So you have different production lines, but they're all doing the same steps at the same time. So it's running the same code actually on all the different data that you have in that group. And what it means is we're actually wasting some of the time here. If some of the tasks we have are already completed, we always need to wait for the last one to finish before we can move on to the next set of work. So how we can avoid this is by making sure the rays in the query are laid out coherently. So they are all aimed in sequence in around the same direction. They start at around the same point, end at around the same point as much as possible. So if we have some emitters on the right side, some emitters on this other side, we should ideally do all the rays for this one, then all the rays for that one, instead of doing one there, one there, one there, one there, sort of that kind of thing. So what about we want to trace some ray clusters? Well, we actually need to take a bit of a time off and rearrange this factory, set up new production lines, and that takes quite a bit of time. And then we can do our other work with the same principles apply here as well. So it's usually best to prefer single, larger workloads instead. So how does this look like then in practice? Well, we do our propagation simulations. Let's take a look at the sort of broader timeline. And then this is just a part of a hypothetical update cycle on the propagation system. So it takes several frames to complete the full update. For example, here, first, we might do a single workload of a bunch of first-order reflection points. So this is what we use for the complex path. We trace out a bunch of rays in a sphere from the listener. And then we use this data later when we get to the results to trace bounces. So we need to know, of course, where it hit first. So we need to wait for that to come back and then trace out the bounces. Of course, that means we're waiting. So we can't immediately know where the hit is. We can't submit this next workload. But the GPU still needs something to do in the meantime. So while we wait, we submit some other type of work, which is the direct ray cones or ray clusters to get that initial obstruction value. And once we get those results, we get to know if we need to trace diffraction rays for this emitter. If it's not obstructed, we don't need to do that. So that might still be a bit too much work sometimes for one frame, since some rays are more expensive than others, and sometimes there's a lot of emitters, sometimes there's not so much. So we estimate this work and try to intelligently split it up, thinking about the coherency, as I said before. So if we have emitters on different parts of the world, we try to group them and say, okay, we're going to do rays for these ones, then those ones, and those ones in different frames. And we avoid downtime by shuffling these dependencies so that there's never a direct dependency on the previous query. So just to summarize, we try to use a single workload, single compute pass in one frame due to this high setup cost. We try to make sure all the rays are coherent, so they're in sequence, so that we always do similar rays in a row as much as possible. And we try to keep the GPU busy by making sure that we don't have direct dependencies on the different queries. And we use time slicing and intelligently splitting the work in different parts to, based on the workload that we have, to distribute and have a consistent load on the GPU. So that was also quite important when we talk with the graphics people, that we don't have some random huge spikes on the frame times that could cause stuttering, and instead we try to really balance the load so that we always do about the same amount of work every frame.
Yes, and then before we sort of start wrapping up and talk about some future plans, we've just made a little video of our favorite bits from the game where we feel like this system gets a chance to shine. So we'll show you.
The RDA's still looking for me. That was their best.
It feels so cool, though. Guiding them over the radio. Taylor knows.
Thank you. That was a slow rise that got applause.
Yeah.
So we'll just talk a bit about the future now, what we still want to do. I still want to get rid of the room data. That would be really nice to not have to rely on stuff. And it would be so cool if we can, you know, make a system that we don't have to tag this and tag that and add rooms and stuff.
Absolutely. And we also are looking into sound reflections. So this is something that kind of touched upon with the complex indirect path calculations, where we trace out reflection rays. And we already have a lot of this data, and it's something we're experimenting with now to try to use that to play early reflections as well that are specific to each sound emitter. And then also want to mention that it's also good to try to streamline the propagation system. Something that we noticed during development is that as we built out the system, it collects so much information about the environment that we have other systems that also might benefit from, like the current slabback system, which is used for late reflections, or bubble space, which is used to determine the acoustic profile of the space that you're in. And we would like to try to reuse the same collected data that we already have as much as possible to reduce the total time needed to complete these tasks. And then, yeah, we have some takeaways.
Takeaways, top tips. This is the final slide. Is it? No. Let's see. Fail quickly. We like to do that, just to be like, try some things out, test it in the game. It's a good idea, and because we could sometimes end up discussing edge cases for a very long time.
And then a good gym is nice. This is what we mean by that is we use this term for test levels, as we mentioned. So it's good to test in the game, as you mentioned, and figure out some cool test cases. We always try to then build them out in a test level so that, especially in these large open world games, it's always difficult to test all the different conditions. And sometimes it's just really tricky to get into that exact situation to reproduce the issue even. So we try to always build out any issue that we notice, we build out the test, and then we make sure to test it while iterating and just to avoid regression and increase our workflow speed.
Yeah, and then finally the collaboration is quite good. It's nice to have stakeholders on both audio programming and sound design, and as well have a good collaboration with the graphics teams if we want to use the GPU stuff. So yeah, that's the top tip. Maybe that's a different talk, how to get a good relationship with graphics.
And
this is the improvised last slide where we say thank you.
thank you both to you and to all the people up here as well who helped us make this happen. And
to you for coming.
And yeah, absolutely, we did not expect this to be so full, especially during the keynote happening in the other room.
And with the drinks last night, it's like,
And with the victory of England.
Oh yeah, the English victory? Yeah, maybe that, I don't know.
Crazy. If you have any questions, feel free to ask now. Also, we have our contact info here if you want to reach out later. No worries.
Yeah, if you think of something later, you can write us. If you watch it online, you can find us in the future. And that's it. I think we have a microphone down here, so if anyone has any questions.
Hello guys, thank you for the talk. I mean, my question is really non-technical, but I'm wondering how long did it take for you to achieve that?
How long?
Yeah, in total, how much have you spent working from the idea towards where you are now?
Oh, it's a good idea. It's a good question. A couple of years, maybe.
Yeah,
but it's not
hard
like
to say.
Didn't like work full time on this for years. It was more like we make some plans, we try some things, and we sort of assess like what do we need to do next. And
it's usually a bit of time in between where I build a prototype, we get it in the game, and then it takes a few weeks or months where we maybe have to do some other things, and then we wait collect some feedback from people and do some meetings, and then we see, okay, what's the next step we can take. But yeah, I mean, in total, maybe a few years of work here and there, and the different versions take maybe like a few weeks or a month or something like that to remake.
And it takes time to test like those changes also, because the game is so big. So maybe we try it in the same levels again and again, and it sounds good, but then we go to a different part of the world, and then it's you find some issues.
Also, the game is still being built as we go as well. So we're like, oh, maybe there's a whole new area that we need to make sure it sounds good there as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have one over here.
Thanks. Could you talk about how you form or you create the visibility grid to do the diffraction modeling? Do you trace array from the listener to each of the center of the grid locations, or how do you do that?
Yeah, so the version we had in the release version of Avatar, we essentially set up a grid that is scaling over distance as well. So we have like a different LOD profiles that scale down over distance, and then we just shoot array to each single point. So in the end, it was around maybe 10,000 points in space that we, because that fits so well with the kind of workloads that GPU is used to handle. All the rays are extremely coherent and so close together. We thought like maybe we can just trace some rays and then calculate the different distances and so on. But at that time, it just worked really well to just do everything in one frame, and it was fast enough. But now we're looking into also improving a bit on the diffraction to maybe try to find use maybe more like a depth-based approach, and then identify edge points, and then kind of do diffraction in real time as well without as much needs for portals.
Yeah, that's really cool. And one more. Can you share numbers on how many rays you're firing for your reflection, like how many out from the listener and how many bounces?
So usually it can be around 3,000-4,000 rays maybe a frame, but it really depends because, as mentioned, we try to do this intelligent splitting up of work. So sometimes we see, okay, we have a lot of emitters that are or a lot of reflections that are all very different directions. They're going all over the place. We know this will cost a lot more to trace than if we see an emitter that has all the reflections pointed in the same direction. So we take that into account, and then we can sometimes only trace 2,000 rays, sometimes 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, depends.
Cool. So that's 2,000 like total, including the bounces?
The bounces we actually trace, so for the primary reflections we trace out first, and then the bounces we trace each frame. We trace, if we have, let's say, 3 bounces total, we trace from each point on each of the different levels and we do one sort of step, if it makes sense. It's a bit tricky to explain maybe, but so we do, let's say if we have around 1,000 primary rays, then we want 3 bounces on those. We'll trace 1,000 plus 3,000 every time, so like maybe 4,000.
Right.
And then we do that every cycle, we do one step. So it takes, we don't need that responsive reflection point, so it takes a bit of time to get to the final stage.
Right. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Oh, I think just next to you.
Just as the game's really nice and vertical, were there any bits in the settings that you particularly used to encourage the player to look up or look down, or maybe things you tweaked in a certain way?
To make the player look up or down, like in the game?
Yeah, just vertically, yeah, to encourage them to be aware of what's above them or what's below them, or did these settings translate well to it?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think we did much for the vertical stuff. I think Alex in the mix did some sort of EQing to give sort of a sense of like, this thing is above you, this thing is below you. But this system didn't really.
Yeah, I think, of course, like the diffraction works. So if you're on one of the floating islands and you walk along the edge, it has this nice effect of just like bending, because it works fully in 3D. So it can work around sides, but also up, down. And also in some cases where we used portals, it helped to sell the idea of you're standing on a bridge and there's a sound below you, but it's also being repositioned through some of the portals that are on the side, and adding some obstruction and diffraction on those helped sell this kind of idea.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi. Oh, thank you for the nice talk. I was wondering about the physics geometry, what that looks like, what you're testing against, and what the collaboration with the graphic artist was to maybe get information that you need from the physics to cast against.
So actually for sound propagation, we don't use the physics geometry in this game. So we use the ray trace geometry, which is what the ray tracing system is using for indirect lighting as well. And it's essentially a very low LOD version of all the meshes that we have in the game. Yeah. So it's all the graphical assets. And then we have graphics artists already tagged sort of PBR material values on those, and we use those to calculate some kind of transmissiveness value based on some formula to get a result that is sort of equivalent. But yeah, because of all the rays we can do, it also helps not needing to really tag the individual things.
Did you find that those needed to be adjusted for sound, or because of indirect light would kind of need different things than sound?
There were only a few cases where we noticed that, let's say, for glass panels, they completely removed those from the ray tracing world because it's just transparent for visuals. And of course, for us, it's very important that it's there and occludes, especially on windows. But it was a very simple thing of basically them adding a special flag on each mesh to say, is this included in the audio ray tracing or not? So they added that geometry still in the map to flag it with a special flag, and then when we do audio ray tracing, it's included, otherwise it's excluded. But we use the specularity and the metalness and those values to determine if it's glass or if it's cloth hanging, for example. Looks like that's time's up, I see. I don't know if there's more questions, or otherwise you can reach out or catch us later. Time's up, yes.
We've got time for one more, I think. There's somebody over there.
Yeah, one last one. This is where it will crumble. Under the
Yeah. Hardest for last.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I had a question about the unnatural occlusion behavior that you had. Did you consider, or was it an option to treat different sound types separately so that you had different occlusion? Maybe you could add a multiplier or disable occlusion on certain types?
Yes. I think we thought about it. I remember we had a really long meeting about it and was like, what are we going to do? And we had the version of Wise where we didn't have occlusion and obstruction like in the attenuations yet. So we were sort of thinking like, shit, how do we set up all these curves? And I think at this point we were also trying to really wrap it up. So if we had to go in and add curves per sound, it would take a long time that we didn't have. So I think we sort of, I don't know if it was a bit hacky. I feel like it was smart. Maybe it was hacky to use the sort of push it away.
I guess it also wouldn't have helped us solve the issue we talked about, where we would use this both for this complex path thing, but also the passing through objects, and that sometimes just the filters you want for that just didn't really match exactly. But yeah, like I guess that as well.